My name is David Schlissel. I'm the Director of Resource Planning Analysis for IEEFA. Today I'm going to talk about a report that my colleague Dennis Wamstead and I wrote about Project Tundra, a proposal to retrofit the Milton R. Young Unit 2 coal plant in North Dakota with carbon capture. The report is titled Project Tundra, a step in the wrong direction. Many of you probably already know this, but Project Tundra would be a retrofit of the 43-year-old 455 megawatt Young Unit 2, which is owned by Square Butte Electric Cooperative. Minnkota Electric Power Cooperative manages Young Unit 2. And Square Butte and Minnkota share 11 co-op owners. There have been only 2 carbon capture projects from coal plants, although there's a number from other sources. Those 2 carbon capture projects from coal plants are first, Boundary Dam Unit 3, which is located in Saskatchewan, Canada, and then the Petronova project near Houston, which was designed to capture the CO2 from a 240 megawatt portion of the flue gas from the WA Parish Unit 8 coal plant. Petronova was indefinitely mothballed in May of this year because continued operation was deemed not economic. The plan for Project Tundra is to add a facility to capture the CO2 from Young Unit 2, initially to place the captured CO2 in underground geologic storage, but to keep open the potential for selling part of the captured CO2 for use in enhanced oil recovery, which is also called EOR. In EOR, the CO2 is compressed and injected underground. It pushes up oil that would not otherwise be producible. The plan for Project Tundra is also to take advantage of federal tax credits. These are called federal 45Q tax credits to finance the project. For each metric ton that is captured at a coal plant and used in enhanced oil recovery, the owner gets a $35 credit for each metric ton. For each metric ton that is placed in underground geologic storage, the tax credit is $50. Minnkota's big gamble to us is that it has acknowledged that carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology, known as CCS or CCUS, has not been adequately demonstrated for nationwide use. This is what they admit. However, Minnkota is gambling that Project Tundra can succeed because of its unique geologic location in North Dakota, where there are spaces underground to store the captured CO2. But if it loses this bet, the ratepayers of the cooperatives that own Minnkota and Square Butte and that buy the power from Young Unit 2 may have to pay substantially higher rates for their electricity, or indeed have to pay for a failed project. Project Tundra faces 6 key risks that we've identified. We'll go over these in more detail in the rest of the presentation, but I'd like to summarize them now. The first is uncertainty over how much it's going to cost to add the new carbon capture facility and the associated project infrastructure, which means piping and the facilities to inject the CO2 underground. The second risk is uncertainty about how much CO2 Project Tundra actually will capture, because the amount of tax credits they get depends on two factors. First is how much CO2 is produced by the plant, which is itself a function of how much it operates, and then how much of the CO2 is produced is captured. So both of those, how much CO2 is produced, how much is captured, are key variables in determining how profitable a carbon capture project will be. The third risk is whether Square Butte in Minnkota will be able to finance Project Tundra entirely with federal 45Q tax credits. The fourth risk is uncertainty concerning the cost of capturing the CO2 that is projected to be produced by Young Unit 2. The fifth risk is Young Unit 2 is already a high cost of electricity and can be expected to be even more expensive if retrofitted for carbon capture. And the sixth risk is that there are significant uncertainties that cloud the outlook for both geologic storage and EOR-dependent carbon capture. Back to risk number one, uncertainty over the cost of retrofitting Young Unit 2 for carbon capture. As I mentioned before, the Petra Nova facility is the only carbon capture facility that has been built in the US to capture the CO2 from a coal plant. Minnkota estimates that it can retrofit Young Unit 2 for between $1 and $1.6 billion, but doing so would require achieving substantial reductions below the actual cost of building Petra Nova. As you can see in the chart on slide 6, in 26-year dollars, the average cost per kilowatt of building Petra Nova was roughly $5,000 per kilowatt. The three light blue bars or columns on the in the chart indicate the range of 1 to 1.6 billion that Minnkota has estimated for the retrofit. You can see that any of these would require a substantial reduction or savings in over what it cost to build Petra Nova. While we agree that indeed some reductions can be achieved, that's why we've put in as a placeholder the 30% reduction in the cost from Petra Nova. We don't think that the range of 33 to 58% savings is realistic. Bottom line, we think it would cost more to retrofit Young Unit 2 than Minnkota currently estimates, or at least be at the higher level, the higher end of their range of estimates. Now, one of the reasons why we expect the cost of Minnkota's retrofit of Young Unit 2 to be on the more expensive range is that they're planning to use a different carbon capture technology than was used at Petra Nova. Petra Nova used a technology developed by Mitsubishi, a Japanese firm. However, Minnkota is planning to use a carbon capture technology developed by Fluor Corporation. This technology has only been tested at very small scale at a level of 5.5 megawatts and 40 megawatts. Problems can be anticipated, we believe, in scaling the technology up to the 455 megawatt commercial scale of Young Unit 2. As you can see, that Young Unit 2 is roughly 70 to 80 times, between 10 and 80 times larger than the small scale test facilities at which the Fluor carbon capture technology has been studied. With other technologies, significant problems have been experienced in scaling up from the small scale test facilities to the commercial scale power plants. The chart on slide 7 shows two examples. One, the darker blue one on the left part of the slide shows the cost history of the Edwardsport IGCC plant in Indiana. IGCC stands for Integrated Gasification Combined Cycle, different technology than the carbon capture technologies we're talking about today, but still both of these plants, Edwardsport and Kemper, the technologies were studied at small scale, and then problems were experienced when they were built at commercial scale. The cost of Edwardsport went from an estimated $2 billion to an actual cost of $3.5 billion. The estimated cost of Kemper went from $3 billion, increased by, a factor of 2.75 to $7.5 billion. While we don't expect cost escalation on this scale at Minnkota, significant cost escalation as the technology is scaled up is certainly possible. And problems can be experienced when the unit goes into service. Edwardsport has not operated nearly as well as its owner, Duke Energy Indiana, originally predicted. The Kemper IGCC plant shown in this chart actually doesn't operate as an IGCC plant because the coal gasification technology that it was scaling up didn't work reliably. So basically, it's the world's most expensive natural gas plant now. Risk 2 is uncertainty. How much CO2 Project Tundra will actually capture? 90% capture is the holy grail for carbon capture, but achieving this goal over the long term has not been proven at either Boundary Dam or Petra Nova. For example, at Boundary Dam, it was claimed that the carbon capture facility would capture 1 million metric tons of CO2 a year. At Petra Nova, it was claimed that the carbon capture facility would capture 1.4 million metric tons of CO2 per year. Neither project has achieved its goal. As you see in the chart on slide 8, in the first 3 years of operation, it was estimated that Petra Nova would capture 4.2 million metric tons. Only 3.5 million metric tons were captured during that 3-year period. For Boundary Dam, which went into service earlier, it was estimated that 5 million metric tons of CO2 would be captured during the first 5 years of operation of the carbon capture facility. Actually, barely 3 million tons were captured. As I mentioned before, 90% capture over the long term is the holy grail. The actual Petra Nova CO2 capture rate was somewhere in the range of 75% through 83% before the project was indefinitely mothballed earlier this year. The actual Boundary Dam capture rate has been somewhere in the range of 55 to 60%, both significantly below the 90% targets. Risk number 3 is whether Project Tundra can be financed entirely with federal 45Q tax credits. The way the tax credits work is that investors would put the initial funds for retrofitting Young Unit 2. Investors would put those up, and then as the plant produces and captures CO2, for each metric ton of CO2 that is either used for enhanced oil recovery or that is sequestered underground, the investors would receive a tax credit. So if the plant produces and captures 3 million metric tons of CO2, there would be 3 million tax credits, each representing a $35 credit if the CO2 is used for enhanced oil recovery, or $50 if the CO2 is placed in underground sequestration. Now, if you look at the chart on slide 9, you'll see 3 sets of 2 bars. Basically, each set of 2 bars represents the 3 cost estimates that Minnkota has released or is discussed for the retrofitting of Young Unit 2, ranging from $1 billion up to $1.6 billion for the retrofit cost. Now, the orange portion of each bar reflects what we estimate Minnkota will be able to raise through 45Q tax credits. The gray portion then represents the additional funding that would have to be raised if the federal 45Q tax credits were insufficient to entirely finance the project. As you can see, as the estimated cost of the project goes up, the amount that would have to be financed outside of the federal 45Q tax credit program goes up. We think this is a significant risk, and that more likely, instead of 100% of the financing, only 57 to 80% of the overall project cost will be able to finance through 45Q tax credits. The remaining funds will have to be raised elsewhere, again, either from investors or perhaps the Minnkota or Square Butte or their member owners would have to put up some funding. Any additional funds that have to be raised will raise the overall total project cost. Uncertainty regarding the cost of capturing CO2 is the 4th risk. The U.S. Department of Energy and other CCUS proponents report that the actual cost of capturing CO2 from coal plants has been and is currently somewhere in the range of $60 to $65 per metric ton. But there's no real evidence on what it's costing at either Petra Nova or Boundary Dam. The goal of proponents of CCUS is to reduce that cost from the $60 to $65 range to $30 per metric ton by 2030. This is necessary in order for CCUS to be financially viable. Now, proponents of CCUS use the following chart to claim that there is a declining cost trend in capturing CO2, but this chart is very misleading. You can see the dashed line in the chart on slide 10. You look at that and you say, hey, the cost is decreasing. Well, in reality, the only 2 projects that have been built are Petra Nova and Boundary Dam, which are the red dots sort of in the middle of the chart. The green dots to the left were all projects that were studied and never built. So all they had were estimated costs that have not been proven in actual operation. Now, the lower costs to the right, the blue dots, are all estimated costs. Now, some in the industry claim that they've achieved savings already, but that's just patently untrue. The only 2 actual experienced plants that have actually captured CO2 from coal plants are Petra Nova and Boundary Dam. And as the U.S. Department of Energy and CCUS proponents acknowledge, their costs are somewhere in the range of $60 to $65 per metric ton. So bottom line, nobody knows what it's going to cost to capture CO2 from a project like Project Tundra. And obviously, the more expensive it is to capture CO2, the less economic the project is. Risk number 5 is that Young Unit 2 already is a high-cost generator of electricity and can be expected to remain one even if retrofitted for CCUS. Now in the chart on slide 11, the blue bars are the all-in cost. That includes fuel, non-fuel O&M, and fixed costs, which include interest and federal taxes. Excuse me. You can see that the all-in cost has grown dramatically from 2011 through 2019. Actually grew earlier and has stayed at a fairly high level. The orange bars are just the O&M costs, fuel plus non-fuel O&M. And the gray line that goes up and down is what it would have cost to buy power from the MISO market, buy both energy and capacity from the MISO markets. You can see that in every year from 2014 to 2019, the price of producing power, just the O&M, the fuel and non-fuel O&M at Young Unit 2 has been more expensive, and in most years far more expensive than it would have cost to buy it in the MISO markets. The reason we don't have orange charts for 2011, 12, and 13 is that the data was not available on the from the annual reports that are put out by Square Butte Electric Co-op. The earliest data we could find was for 2014. Now there are two reasons basically why, let me jump back for a sec. You can see that recent MISO market prices have been lower, certainly lower than 2014. There are two reasons for this. One is lower natural gas prices, and the second is a dramatic increase in the installed wind capacity and the energy that is generated by this wind capacity. You can see in the light blue bars on in the chart on slide 12 that the amount of wind capacity in MISO has grown dramatically from 7.6 gigawatts in 2009 to 22.6, roughly a tripling by the end of 2019. And it's estimated that by the end of this year, that will grow by another roughly 9 gigawatts. And further increases are expected in subsequent years. The amount of energy generated by wind has grown commensurately from roughly 32,000 gigawatt hours in 2012 to 57,000 gigawatt hours in 2019. Both of those have led to lower market prices. We estimate that the cost of power from Unit 2 is likely to remain expensive in future years. Even if the plant is not retrofitted for carbon capture, retrofitting will make it even more expensive. So the orange line on in the chart on slide 13 shows our estimate of that the cost of a megawatt hour from Young Unit 2, again without retrofitting, would be in the range of $55 to $56 per megawatt hour by 2026, which would grow to $69.45 by 2037. We've assumed a very low rate of increase, 2% per year, from the average cost between 2015 and 2019. The dashed line far below that is what is the market through 2019. It's what the market expects will be the cost of power in the MISO market, or at least the region of MISO market closest to North Dakota. And after 2019, we assumed again a very low 2% rate of increase. So you can see here that it's going to be much more expensive for ratepayers for their cooperatives to get power from Young Unit 2, even if the plant is not retrofitted. Far more economic to buy it from the market. Oops. Slide 14, you can see a chart with blue bars, negative blue bars, and then an orange line. The negative blue bars are what we project would be the difference in cost between buying the power from the market and buying it from Young Unit 2. So in 2023, for example, we estimate that the cost of power from Young Unit 2 would be $92 million more expensive than buying it from the market. Or conversely, you can think of it as buying from the market would be $92 million cheaper than producing it at Young Unit 2. And again, this does not include the fixed costs, which are expensive, which reflect interest on the debt from building the plant and annual capital expenditures and taxes. The declining orange line is just the cumulative value of each of the annual costs. So bottom line, our estimate is that between 2023 and 2038, it will be 1.771 billion more expensive for ratepayers if their co-ops buy the power from Milton R. Young Unit 2 than if they purchase the same capacity and energy from the MISO market. Now, risk number 6 is that there are significant uncertainties that cloud the outlook for both underground geologic storage and EOR-dependent carbon capture. The economics associated with carbon capture at coal plants depend on the ability to either sell the captured CO2 to oil companies interested in using it for EOR, or to sequester the captured CO2 underground. Remember, I mentioned the value of the 45Q credit is higher for each metric ton that is sequestered, $50 per metric ton, compared to the $35 per metric ton tax credit that companies would get for using the CO2 in enhanced oil recovery. Both of these options have serious drawbacks that we believe would undercut Project Tundra's tenuous economics. First, there's significant uncertainty concerning the total cost of drilling, compressing, injecting, and monitoring CO2 over the long term. Recent testimony before Congress by a proponent of carbon capture, former U.S. Energy Secretary Moniz, is that the cost of drilling, compressing, injecting, and monitoring CO2 for underground sequestration would be somewhere in the range of $20 to $25 per metric ton. Now, I mentioned before that the Petra Nova project has been indefinitely mothballed. That project was based on using the captured CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, but it didn't work out. Within the first 3 years of operation, the owner of 50% of the plant, NRG, which is also the operator of the plant, wrote off almost all of their investment in the plant because it wasn't economic. Subsequently, on May 1st of this year, the project was indefinitely mothballed, as I've said several times, due to low oil prices after it had only captured after it only produced 1/3 more oil than had been anticipated. It's unclear what's going to happen when or whether its Petronova is going to be restarted. Finally, there's a tale of two coal plants. Minnkota wants to take what we believe to be a big gamble in retrofitting Milton R. Young Unit 2, already a high-cost generator with carbon capture. Great River Energy, which is also a co-op in Minnesota, is the owner of the Coal Creek Coal Plant, which is located in North Dakota, fairly close to Young Unit 2. But Great River Energy has a different plan. It is planning to retire the Coal Creek units in 2022, replacing it with 1,100 megawatts of new wind power. GRE has said that it's planned to phase out coal resources, to add significant renewable energy, and to explore grid-scale battery storage, which significantly reduce its member owners' supply costs. For more information, you can contact me at david@schlissel-technical.com or Dennis Wamstead at dwamstead@IEEFA.org. Thank you. And again, if you have any questions, please shoot us emails and we'll be happy to answer them.